Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be talking about the BookTube prize. So I'll have a link up in the cards as well as down in the description to like the BookTube prize videos and website and whatnot. So that way if you aren't aware of them, you can check them out for yourself. But basically, Robert organizes this every year and he has a whole system of like ways to nominate books to be part of the BookTube prize and then an elimination process moving forward. So we just finished the semifinal round and I was judging the fiction books or one set of fiction books, and the way that it works every time is that you are assigned 6 books as a judge and then you have to rank them 1 through 6, and those rankings are kind of calculated amongst all the judges, and then the top 3 books move on to the next round. So in this last semifinal round there were 12 fiction books left, 12 nonfiction books left, and like I said, I read 6 of them. So I thought in this video I would just talk about the 6 books that I read, and I will be talking about them in order from how I rank them. So I will be starting with the book that I ranked number 6 and then moving up to the book that I ranked number 1. I've referenced this in a few videos at this point, but basically like the BookTube prize judging for this round for me personally was really different from my first experience. So I judged the first round and I judged a set of nonfiction books, and I'll link to that video in case you're interested in checking that out. But when I was reading those nonfiction books, there was like a very clear ranking for me personally. This set of books was kind of different because I didn't really have quite as clear of a distinction between them. And thinking about it, it kind of makes sense. Like we're in the semifinals now, and so the books that are getting through are books that are pretty good and they all have some value and merit to them. And so now as a judge, you kind of have to figure out what you are going to choose as your distinctors of positive and negative traits, and what matters and what doesn't matter, and how you're going to like evaluate all of these books. So for me, there was like a very clear top 3 and a very clear bottom 3, and it was kind of like the distinction between the bottom 3 books from each other was very minor, and the distinction between the top 3 books from each other were very minor for me. And I will say starting off the bat that my top 3 do not match exactly the 3 that moved on to the next round. So if you already know which books have moved on to the next round, my ranking is a little bit different, which is fine, and I'll talk about that towards the end. So I put at number 6 The Innocents by Michael Crumley. Now this is one of those books that I was so very conflicted about. I've read Michael Crumley before. I read his book Sweetland a number of years ago, and I enjoyed that book. Like he writes these really beautiful quiet novels about these like small Canadian towns or islands or villages or whatnot, and the writing itself is extremely beautiful. I even found the story like really compelling. So in this book, you are following these siblings who live in this like remote island village with their parents, when within like basically 6 months, both of their parents end up passing away, and they're pretty young when this happens. Like I think they are both like under the age of 12 when this first occurs. And the way that their basically life has been set up is that there's this ship that comes twice a year to bring supplies to them, as well as allows the family to sell things to the ship, and they can, gain money that way in order to buy supplies and whatnot. And so they like, fish, and they hunt for animals and use the skins and all that stuff for money. And then they are dependent on this ship in order to like get the supplies, like basic things, canned goods, stuff they can't source on the island themselves in order to survive through the seasons. Of course, now that the parents are passed away, the next time the ship comes, the oldest child, which is a boy, ends up like rowing his boat out to the ship and tells him what happens, and him and his sister have basically decided that they want to stay on the island and try to see if they can fend for themselves. And so they are basically able to do that for a couple of years, and you're just following them over the course of years as they are growing up, learning about themselves, the island, learning how to fend for themselves. The reason why it ended up in the number 6 mark, which I guess minor spoilers if you haven't read the book yet, so I'm going to there are chapter marks in this video, and so just, maybe jump ahead to the next chapter. But if you're okay with like some minor spoilers for The Innocents, then keep watching. But yeah, the reason why I put it at number 6 is because there is an incest storyline. They basically form a relationship that's not super healthy for a brother and a sister, in my opinion, and in the opinion of, I think, most people. So yeah, it just made me so like squicky every time that stuff would come up. It wasn't like constant, but there would be like scenes where you could tell that they are like attracted to each other, aroused by each other. They would sleep in the same bed and things would happen, and it was a little weird for me. It was very uncomfortable for me. So yeah, if that whole storyline was eliminated from this book, this probably would have ranked as like numbers 4 or 5 on this list. But yeah, that really put me off this book, so I put it at number 6. It's so hard to like recommend a book that has a storyline like that, so that's again a very personal thing. But when it comes down to it, this is like, again, the things that I had to think about in order to differentiate these books from one another, because they all had a very equal footing in terms of like skill of writing and stuff like that. Number 5 on my list was Night Tiger by Yangzi Chu. So this is another historical fiction book, but this one has a little bit of like fantastical element to it. You are following these two characters. One of them is named Ren, and he is a houseboy for this doctor who has a severed finger, and the doctor passes away and basically gives Ren the task of finding his figure and reuniting it with his body, so that way his soul may be at peace, as opposed to like having the severed finger out there and then his like spirit will be restless. He ends up becoming the houseboy for this other doctor because he doesn't find the finger right away, and so he has to kind of like investigate to figure out where it has disappeared to. The other character that you are mainly following is this girl named Ji Lin, who is about like, I think, teenage age. She wants to become like a nurse or a doctor or something along those lines, but it's 1930s Malaysia, so opportunities like that aren't really available to women. She has become like a dance hall girl, which is not a very like positive looking job, but she does this because her mother has a lot of debts and they want to hide those debts from her stepfather. And one night she's like doing her job as a dance hall girl, and the person that she's dancing with has a severed finger in his pocket, and she ends up taking it. She ends up enlisting the help of her stepbrother, who is either like in medical school or like doing his residency or something along those lines. He, basically is becoming a doctor. And so they basically like start to work together to try to figure out like where this severed finger came from and whatnot. And so, as you could imagine, these two storylines end up intertwining and becoming a whole thing. So overall, I enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed like the characters in this book. I honestly found everyone to be like really fascinating, and you get to know a lot about these characters, like history and background, and even like the side characters and stuff like that. I felt like it was like a really well fleshed out world, and even the magical elements I didn't mind too much. This is a slower paced book though, so it isn't like a page turner necessarily, but I was like pretty compelled by the story, to be honest. I had seen a lot of people say that this story kind of bored them, but it didn't really bore me at all. The things I didn't really enjoy in this book is everything kind of having to do with like romantic stuff. So one of them is the fact that like Jilin seems to have like a bunch of guys who are interested in her or something along those lines. I don't know. I couldn't really understand what was going on because it never really was super clear to me. And then the other thing, which I was just like, this is hilarious considering The Innocents, but there's also kind of a weird relationship again because spoilers, jump ahead now because I'm just gonna go into the spoilers part of it. If you don't want to be spoiled in the Night Tiger, just be aware. So yes, in terms of like relationship stuff, there's also a relationship that ends up occurring between Jilin and her stepbrother, which they're step siblings, so I guess it's fine, but to me that's still really weird and that throws me off. And I was just sitting here reading these books for the BookTube prize, and I was like, why is there so much like familial romantic relationships in this stuff? There's too many in one set of books. But there is also kind of like a mystery element to the story, and I think that that's also something that really pulled me into the book. So yeah, I didn't hate this book by any means. I actually enjoyed it pretty well, but it's just like compared to the other books, this one was number 5 for me. All right, in number 4, I put A Single Thread by Tracy Chevalier. I think that's how you say her last name. I'm actually not completely sure. Another historical fiction book. This one is set in 1932, so it's like right in between the two world wars. It's set in the UK, and you are following this character named Violet Speedwell, who has become what they call a surplus woman. So basically, you know, because of the world wars, a lot of men are dying, and so there are a lot of women who aren't getting married because either their like significant others already died in the war and they didn't meet anyone else, or you know, just based on pure numbers they aren't meeting anyone. And so this becomes like a really interesting book about this single woman who is basically like a spinster, even though she's like probably in her 30s, and how she is choosing to like live her life. This for me was a like sweet, quiet historical fiction book, but it's like one of those historical fiction books that is like not my own personal jam, just because it's like very wholesome, I suppose. Like, and wholesome is like not a bad thing, but it's just not a thing that really, really appeals to me. And a lot of the things in here just felt like very superficial almost. And you could tell that like Tracy Chevalier, the author, did a decent amount of research in terms of like women who were living during this era and basically these types of like surplus women and what they chose to do with their life. One of the things I really enjoy is kind of like Violet figuring out how to pursue her passions in her life. There's like kind of like this complicated relationship between her and her mother, as well as like her feeling like that she's a burden to her family. She has a brother who's married and has kids and stuff like that. And so there's like interesting discussions in terms of like what is required of Violet because she's a single woman, because she doesn't have a family, and what's required of her brother and how much more responsibility she's like being asked to take on. But it didn't really like blow my mind or anything like that. I'm also a little bit hesitant of like World War II books. Like World War II books don't really do a whole lot for me, so there's that aspect as well. Obviously this is pre-World War II, but there's a lot of like hints as to things that are coming in the future. There's this whole like storyline with the embroideries and the symbols that are used in the embroideries that they're doing in this club that Violet Speedwell ends up joining. And even that whole thing, I was just like, this feels a little bit too pointed. These characters might have a little bit too much knowledge for what is happening and what is going to happen, and stuff like that always just like gets under my skin a little bit. But finally, the thing that I like didn't love about this book, which made it so it wasn't in my top 3, is the romantic storyline. This is another one of those books where there's not an incest storyline, but there is kind of an adultery storyline. Not cool with it. Maybe I'm just like super old-fashioned when it comes to like romantic storylines, but I'm never really gonna be super cool with someone sleeping with someone who's not their spouse. So yeah, I'm not gonna go into the spoiler territory of this one with that relationship, but that's basically all I'll say about it, and that like definitely made it so I didn't really enjoy this book as much as I potentially could have. All right, now we're moving into the top 3 books. And similarly with the bottom 3, all of these books were books where I had to really think about how I wanted to rank them, because I could have potentially put these books in like any order within the top 3 and I would have made sense kind of in my head. But at number 3, I ended up putting The Beekeeper of Aleppo by Christy Lefterry. This is a really beautiful and heartbreaking book. Part of me wonders if like putting it in the number 3 spot was because of like my own headspace. I talked about this in my last Friday Reads episode video, where I've just been like in a weird headspace lately, and this was the last book that I read in this group. And so part of me wonders if like my ranking it at number 3 had to do with that. But I mean, honestly, in the end, I'm completely fine with ranking it at number 3. So in this story, you are following this character named Nuri, who is from Aleppo. He has a wife named Afra. They had a son named Sammy who died in Aleppo, and they are basically now refugees. And so you get to see their life and their journey going from Syria to the UK, and kind of like the stops in between and all that stuff, and the struggles and difficulties that they faced along the way. So there's a lot of things I really love about this book. There's a lot of like just really heartbreaking scenes that happen in here, as you can imagine with any sort of like refugee story. Reading about what's happening in Syria, reading about their struggles and like all of the different problems that they face along the way. They deal with a lot of things that are just heartbreaking. There's no other word for it. It's just like completely heartbreaking, but it's like really like beautifully written. I will say that I had a hard time like getting into this story, and I think part of it is the way that it's written. There are like basically flashback scenes that you're seeing through Neri's eyes, and one thing I will say is like I really enjoyed the way they utilize it. I know this is kind of like a hit or miss thing with people based on what I've seen on Goodreads reviews, but like the way that the flashback scenes are set up is like you end one chapter, there's like a connecting word that connects from one chapter into the next, and it has to do with, I believe, the kind of dreamlike nature of these flashbacks and how like Nuri would basically be like falling asleep and thinking about one thing, and then his, mind would drift into these flashbacks. So I'll just read you one. In my mind, there is a glimpse of corridors and staircases and footpaths that make a grid somewhere far away from here, and not a picture of the sky in the morning, and a red fire flickered on the beach at dawn. So fire was like the chapter header for that chapter, and it like connected those two scenes together. So I actually enjoyed that a lot and liked that sort of ephemeral feeling that it created. So yeah, I will say that there's kind of like a detached nature to this story, which kind of makes sense because like one of the ideas explored in here is kind of like a PTSD type of situation where they've dealt with a really traumatic event, or multiple traumatic events, I should say, and sort of like their handling of it. And so obviously like they themselves are going to be detached from their situation because of that. There are also some things in here that were like, I think meant to be reveals, but to me felt very obvious from the beginning. I think because of that as well, this ended up being number 3 on my list, which again is not a bad rating at all, but it, wasn't enough to be number 2 or number 1. So number 2 on my list, I ended up putting The Dutch House by Ann Patchett. This is one of those books that I'm not going to talk too much about because this was my favorite book that I read last year, or one of my favorite books that I read last year, and I will link up in the cards to my review of The Dutch House. But the reason why it's number 2 on my list is because I know it's not a book for everyone, and I can see the flaws in it, but I still like adored it with all my heart. So like part of like my at least experience and choices with the BookTube Prize is kind of like looking at the books from a wider lens. So it's not necessarily just what I'm enjoying, although that does like play a part in it, obviously, as you could tell from the way that I'm talking about these books. But I do kind of look at these books with a broader lens and try to understand kind of like on a larger level how these books are written and whatnot. So yeah, I didn't have a chance to reread this book, although I really wanted to, but I kind of just, refreshed myself on my own feelings of this book, and it felt right to me to put this in the number 2 spot. And so finally, the book that I put as number 1 was Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo, and this book is just as great as everyone says it is. I'm personally hoping that it wins the BookTube Prize. I obviously haven't read all of the books that are on the list, but I'm like rooting for this one to go all the way. So I think part of the reason why I put this book at number 1 is because I adored it so much, and I adored it despite the fact that it has a lot of things that I normally don't like. So I think that in and of itself like made it like a very clear winner and made it show like how well done it is, because it has so many elements of things I don't enjoy typically in books, but I thoroughly enjoyed it in this book. One of those things is multiple perspective stories, but the way that Bernardine Evaristo sets up her multiple perspectives in this book is like the perfect way to win me personally over, because that's what authors care about, winning me personally over. So this story is set up as following 12 different Black women in the UK, or like Black women who are from the UK, or I should say mostly women. They don't all specifically identify as women, but the way that the story is also set up is that like they're set up in like 3 groups of 3, and so the 3 characters that you follow in a row are all kind of related to each other, and all of their storylines kind of overlap a little bit. Because these stories are all intertwined, you're getting like aspects of all of the characters through basically all of the stories, and so to me it feels like more in depth than you typically get with multiple point of view characters. This was also a book where I didn't mind any of the POVs at all. Like obviously there are some characters that I absolutely adored more than others, but overall I enjoyed reading every single perspective, and I was super intrigued by everyone and what everyone was doing. These characters fall all across like an age spectrum, a class spectrum, an experience spectrum, all of that stuff, and there's a reason why it's getting so much like praise and whatnot. Like deserves all of it. If you are someone who's like maybe intimidated by this book because it looks super long, I 100% think it's worth it. So yes, I put that one in my number one spot for the BookTube prize because it was great and it deserved it. So the books from my round that made it to the finals are Girl, Woman, Other, Beekeeper of Aleppo, and then A Single Thread. So A Single Thread is the one that I didn't put in my top three, and the Dutch House didn't make it into the top three, and I'm honestly fine with it for the most part. Like, the Dutch House to me is a very divisive book. I don't think it's for everyone. I don't think everyone's gonna like it. I just personally adored it, and it hit all of my sort of personal preferences, so that's why I was fine with it, but I completely understand why people wouldn't be ranking it in its top three. And out of those bottom three, obviously like my number four made it. The difference between all of these books is like relatively minor in terms of like my personal feelings and rankings towards them. So there was no way to really upset me unless like Girl, Woman, Other didn't make it. So yeah, that's everything that I have to talk about. This video is like already way longer than I wanted it to be, but that's fine. Let me know down in the comments below if you participated in the BookTube prize this round, what you ended up doing with your rankings, no matter which like group you were helping out with, or if you've read any of these books, feel free to leave your comments down below, or if you have any strong opinions about the books that made it into the next round, feel free to talk about those as well. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.